So good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's event, Forest Health, Recognizing Hemlock Woolly Adelgid and Other Forest Pests in Atlantic Canada. My name is Jennifer White, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Atlantic region, and I will be your moderator for today. I'd like to start by stating that we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work we do across the country is on traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank the original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Today, we acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq. This land is governed in part by the treaties of peace and friendship first signed by the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, and Pescadmagod and the British Crown in 1726. We recognize the interconnected relationships and responsibilities to each other in this land. As a conservation organization, we are grateful to work in Mi'kmaq, and we appreciate the opportunities to continually learn more about how we can deeply engage and move forward the work of reconciliation and conservation. The Nature Conservancy of Canada is a national charity and Canada's leading non-for-profit private land conservation organization working to protect the most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and its partners have helped to protect 14 million hectares or 35 million acres coast to coast to coast. To learn more, visit our website at natureconservancy.ca. In Atlantic Canada, NCC has been working with partners since 1971 to help protect over 36,200 hectares or 89,900 acres. We work collaboratively with communities to help conserve and protect nature. Today, we'll be joined by Jeff Ogden, Provincial Forest Entomologist with the Government of Nova Scotia, and Doug Van Hemison, Nova Scotia Stewardship Manager for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to quickly cover a few housekeeping topics. As we are being joined by people from across the country, you may experience a temporary glitch during the live stream. We thank you in advance for your patience. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be sharing a link to the recording after the event. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues, friends, and family. We also invite your comments and questions after the presentation. You will notice a Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there. Include who the question is intended for, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Jeff Ogden is the Nova Scotia Provincial Forest Entomologist. A graduate of Acadian University and Mount Allison University, Jeff has been with forest protection since 1993. Over those 29 years, his duties have varied from seasonal lab assistant to forest health specialist, collections curator, and field entomologist. Jeff has been in his current role since the summer of 2021. Greatest accomplishments to date are due primarily to the strong professional relationships that have been formed with past and current forest health and regional staff and numerous collaborations over the years. Results of these collaborations include developing and maintaining a strong forest pest annual monitoring program, countless research projects on forest pests and insect biodiversity, and the curation of the provincial entomology collection. The floor is yours, Jeff.
Thank you. I'll try sharing my screen. So I don't want to show people I'm watching hockey or anything, so I have to make sure I get the right one. Can you see it? Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to share some of this information. I'll try to be as brief as I can. If any of you have met me before, I'm a little long-winded, So my 20 minutes may be stretched out a little bit, and I apologize ahead of time. Within the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, we survey for a multiple amount of forest pests from across the province, but it's not a one-person job. And I like to show the people that are actually working and doing the work for us at the first slide to show, to emphasize that it's a team that provides all this work. And the bigger the picture doesn't mean that the person that does the bulk of the work, just in case Aaron is on the line. These dots that we have across the province, we don't sample for every species at every spot on the dots of this map that I show you here, but I want to demonstrate that we do focus across we do cover the entire province. I noticed this is an older map because north of Cape Breton National Park is void of dots. So that is now corrected. We have quite a few number of survey spots throughout Cape Breton. We usually monitor annually a dozen. So we call it the dirty dozen of forest pests. They range from beetles, moths, invasives, native species. Some of them are causing some grief. Some of them are just there and they're very eruptive. So we just monitor them on a regular basis just to catch if there is any eruption to population. For the past few years, these ones that I've circled here, these hemlock looper, white mark tussock, black-headed budworm, their numbers have been relatively low. We continue to monitor them through pheromone trapping, visual surveys, aerial surveys, overwintering surveys, just to figure what the populations are doing and if they are increasing. But so far, we've been very lucky. Everything has been quite quiet. That hasn't always been the past. The case in the past, we've had a number of years where we have multiple forest pests all at once, and we're running from one end of the province, trying to keep track of them all. But right now, it's reasonably quiet. Knock on wood. First one I'm going to speak of today is spruce budworm. The actual reason our section exists, it's a native species. It's from across North America. It is a natural disturbance pest, so it occurs in their environment. It's not introduced. We monitor through a series of pheromone traps, and a pheromone trap it uses the natural attractant from the female. Scientists have created fake pheromones. They put them in the traps. The insects are attracted to those. The males are attracted to those traps, and we get an idea what the population is doing. We can't determine if there's any real problems with moth counts because they pull them in from various areas, but we use them to get a general idea of what the populations are doing when we use pheromone traps. We have 176 traps placed across the province. Of ones, these are not daily monitored ones. These ones we put out in June, and we come back at the end of August, first part of September, pick them up. So we can't get specific as to when the moths are actually occurring in the environment, but we get an idea what the population is doing. As you can see from this map, everything seems to be quite quiet in 2022. In 2021, we had populations, I don't know if there's a future slide anyway, along the north shore of the province and in Cape Breton. And that's historically where the populations have built up for previous outbreaks of spruce budworm. This year, we've had higher numbers in the Cape Breton area, but they were lower than last year. Hang on, next slide. We also have daily monitoring traps. As I mentioned before, the other ones just give you a ballpark idea of what's going on. You put them out in August, June, pick them up in August. The daily monitoring ones can tell us if there's any immigration events. There's currently an outbreak in Quebec, which is over several million hectares, and it's starting to cause defoliation in New Brunswick and also in Newfoundland. Well, as these populations build up, if weather conditions are right and the winds are in the right direction, these mass migration events can come from these outbreak areas and land on our shores. These can augment our current population and actually cause help in outbreak situations. So we put these daily monitoring traps. The one down here in the left-hand corner, this is a automated pheromone trap. It's run off solar power, and the moths go in. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I apologize, you can't. But the moths go in the little chimney thing on the top part. They're attracted to that. They fall down to this little tube, and then they land on a roll of sticky tape. And then every few hours, a camera takes a photo of those moths and sends it back to a lab in, I believe it's Quebec. And we can tell if these moths came in 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or if they came in midnight, what have you. But they also tells us if what day they come in, which is more important, because if we just have a bag full of moths, it could be 500 moths, and we don't know if they came from our area, or if they all came in one day, or if they went for 2 months and they come in dribs and drabs. This one will tell us, it'll give us an idea if there's a migration event, if there's a large influx of moths coming to these traps outside of our natural phenology of the local moth. So if it comes 2 weeks earlier than our local flight, it's like a migration event. If it comes a week or two after our local flight, it's like a migration event. We also have provincial parks that have been monitoring smaller traps, which they have to go out empty every day, and they're doing the same thing for us. These traps have indicated, not so much this year, but 2 previous years, where there has been small migration events coming from Quebec to our north shore of the province and in the west coast of Cape Breton. Now I mentioned the moths. We monitor those so we get an idea of the population. Well, if we're going to monitor for anything to indicate a problem, like if there's going to be defoliation the following year, we look at the overwintering stage of the spruce budworm. In this case, it's the second instar, tiny little 2 millimeter caterpillar that overwinters on the needles of the spruce or fir. We wash that through a series of strainers and chemicals and what have you. And those numbers give us a better indication if there's going to be any problems in the following year. Well, this year, most of those dots on the provincial map at this point are X's. We haven't had them; they're not processed as of yet, but we did prioritize some to go to the lab in New Brunswick this year to find out what's going on in some of our higher moth counts. And we did get 4 sites this year come back with moderate numbers of L2s, which may indicate that we may have to do some intervention. We're still in the process of that decision making and getting the rest of our sample sites processed, as well as we went back last week and did additional sampling around those sites that had higher L2 counts to find out how far those L2 populations may be. So we want not just one-offs, because you're taking 3 branches, one branch from 3 trees in the middle of nowhere. The chances of you actually finding the larva, if populations are just normal, are pretty slim. For 20 years, we didn't find one. It was almost a lottery. We were gambling every year to figure out who would find the first L2. We did in 2014, and numbers have been steadily increasing since. This was last year's overwintering L2 survey. As you can see, the blue dots were on the North Shore. That's where the higher trap catchers were, and in the Cape Breton area. But those numbers were below any threshold indicators that we'd have to do any mitigation. But we were just watching. Whoa, I jumped ahead. This is the Cape Breton picture. Gives us a closer look at the areas that were higher L2 counts. Are you seeing somebody answer? Are you just seeing my screen? I'm seeing some black things across my images. Are you just seeing a clear slide? thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I was distracted by that. Good. Anyway, that was just a close-up of the L2 numbers that were sites that we're getting this year. We'll skip on to the next one. Other insects that we monitor are invasive species. They can be problematic because there's no natural predators for them. There's no natural defenses in the trees. They may multiply faster. Some of them displace other species, but we can't do that on our own as well, or either. So we have partners with Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Parks Canada, local groups like Mersetobiatic Research Institute and the Medway Forest Co-op. Again, got to get a plug in for our partners. The three main species that we've been monitoring the last few years are the emerald ash borer, the beech leaf mining weevil, and hemlock woolly adelgid. All three of them have caused, two of them have caused a great deal of damage across the province. And the emerald ash borer at this point seems to be isolated in a small spot. But if any of you have heard of the damage that the emerald ash borer can cause, we are monitoring it closely because it can go like wildfire once it gets going. The first one is the beech leaf mining weevil. First, the date says 2012, was first detected in Halifax. To be honest, it was detected a few years prior to that. Samples were brought into my office of defoliated beech with holes in it and some defoliation, but no bugs. So I really had no idea what it was. The following year, same thing, just some damage. It was widespread, but no bugs. Without bugs, no bug in hand, I really can't. It's difficult to tell you what the problem is. The third year, damage came in, but the bug parts. So I had an idea that it was a beetle, but that's it. It was tiny and bug part. The fourth year, they finally had some samples that were ID'd as either one species that was native or another species that was introduced. Additional samples were collected by the Canadian Forestry Service, and they were identified as this invasive species, the beech leaf mining weevil. The weevil feeds in both the larval and the adult stage. The tiny holes that you see in the leaf are caused by the adults. They have a small snout. They're a weevil. And at the end of their snout, they have little mandibles and they chew holes in the leaves. The larvae, they mine the leaves. So the eggs are laid at the ribs of the leaf, and they feed between the layers of the leaf and eat all the material that is in there. Initially, it was defoliation, then some dieback of a branch here or a branch there, but quickly we realized that this was a major problem. We're starting to see large areas of mortality. I think the next map shows. Yeah, this year we've through our annual aerial survey, we've mapped over 139,000 hectares of forest that have been impacted by the beech leaf mining weevil throughout the province. The beech leaf mining weevil has been found both in New Brunswick and in PEI as well. Where they are in PEI and New Brunswick, I'm not really sure and at what level. I'll find out more about that next week, likely in a meeting. But for Nova Scotia, it's very widespread and very devastating. And this, from what we can see from the air, is moderate to severe damage. If it's light damage, we may not necessarily be able to detect that from the air, from the helicopter going such kilometers an hour. Some of the areas highlighted are north of Truro, Halifax, and Cape Breton is where the beetle was first detected, and it has spread from the metro area out. And then in the last few years, there have been more detections along in the Annapolis Valley, Digby area, and now into the Yarmouth County area. Now, in addition to the beech leaf mining weevil, and I don't have any slides on this, we also had a lot of damage this year from our ash rust, which has been in the ash. It happens every year, but on varying levels. If we have a wet spring, the infestations or the infections, can be quite widespread. And then this year, north of Truro and in the Digby area, there were large areas of ash as well as the beech that were defoliated at the same time. So some of this damage that we see, especially in the Naples Valley and the Digby County area, could be a combination of both ash rust and the beech leaf mining weevil. For the beech leaf mining weevil, unfortunately, there's no spray, there's no cure, there's absolutely nothing we can do. There's no biocontrol at this point. We're looking into it, and I say we, the scientific community is looking into it, but at this point, there's very little we can do to stop the spread of this pest. The other one is the emerald ash borer, initially found in the Bedford in a small park. We thought it was only a few trees, but within a few years of monitoring, we realized it's in a number of trees within the Bedford area. It's a boring insect, not that it's dull, it's a boring insect. The larvae feed underneath the bark. I think I have some pictures later of some of the damage. First detection of EAB, if you're out in the field, look for woodpecker damage on ash. That the woodpeckers seem to be much better at detecting it than any traps we have or any lures that we can draw them in with. The woodpeckers know that the beetles are underneath the bark and they start feeding. There's also, epicormic shoots that would come at the base of your trees caused by the stress, and those are suckers, but I'm used to calling them as suckers. You'll have cracks in the bark, and then D-shaped exit holes where the adults are actually emerging from underneath the bark. They're pretty beetle, but they cause a lot of damage. We use the sticky traps to monitor for the emerald ash borer. These are triangular shaped traps we put into the canopy of the trees. And if I could see my screen, I'll tell you what slide's coming up. No, it's not it. Anyway, we put these in the trees and the insects are attracted to a lure and they stick to this tanglefoot, which is a horrible product to actually use because you can't get the beetles off. And it gets on you, and anyway, it's not fun to work with. We monitor across the province outside of the regulated zone, which is the Halifax County, for this beetle. We've been doing this since 2016, and we've had no detections of emerald ash borer outside of the city of Halifax. This is unfortunately a good example of what the damage can happen. This is in the Dewolf Park, one of the first spots that the beetle was detected at. The picture on the right was in 2020. It's not a lot of people around, 2020. And then we went back in 2022, and these are the trees, same trees. I had to find the exact same tree here. Totally dead, and now those trees are gone. The city has removed those this year. This is some of the damage that this is what the damage looks like underneath the bark. The zigzaggy galleries of the larva. If you peel back a bark on the ash tree and you see these telltale signs of the galleries, you have emerald ash borer. This is the trap I spoke of. We hang it up in the trees. Now this is an older map. I haven't been able to get the new one. This is a good map. This map shows the traps that we put out in 2021. The Dewolf Park area is this one at the head of the basin. This one here is at Mount St. Vincent, just down the road. Those are the only two positive traps we had in 2021. We repeated this survey in 2022 with additional traps to the west, and almost every one of those traps came back positive this year. So the beetle is spreading within the city of Halifax. For control of this species, there are stem injections that you can use, chemical products that you can use on individual trees. That's not extremely practical for forest settings, but it is doable. The Canadian Forestry Service is also looking at biocontrol releases of parasitic and predatory wasp of the emerald ash borer. These species are specific to the emerald ash borer, and they've been doing those releases for the last few years at the head of the basin. The province will be taking a larger role in that in the next few years. So it's unfortunately it's not great. In 2021, I was quite happy that we only saw 2 spots that had the beetles. In 2022, we're all out here in the peninsula and to the west of the city into the Bedford and Clayton Park area also has a good number of beetles. And good number, I mean hundreds. Hemlock woolly adelgid. This has been all consuming for the last few years of my time and many people in the department. First detected in the Digby area in 2017, I believe is the year. Not by us, it was detected by an arborist, and quickly we realized how widespread this pest was. Our initial flight over the province, now this map here is 2021 with 10,000 hectares, but when we initially went out in 2018, there was 17,000 hectares that were impacted. And like the beech leaf mining weevil, to actually see it from the air, it has to be moderate to severe damage. So there was lots of hectares in the 2018 area that were in light condition or light damage that we wouldn't have noticed from the air. You don't notice until you're down the ground. I've been in sites where you didn't know it was there. The trees look so lovely, and then you flip over a branch and it's loaded with the HWA. This is a crawler, the tiny little only stage that actually is mobile of the Hemlock woolly adelgid. It's less than a millimeter long. In Nova Scotia, our adelgid have a longer period of these crawlers being in the environment. They start in April and May, and I've detected them in the environment right up until September, first part of September. And I do have 2 generations, and it's a very complicated life cycle, but that's your time of risk. Once the adelgid is established on a tree, it cannot spread. You could yank that branch in the middle of winter, it could be covered in the white wool. You give it a shake on a new tree, it won't matter. Once it's established, it cannot be removed. If it's removed, it dies. It's only these crawlers crawling stage that's a problem. Let's see if I'm over time already, Doug. Sorry, I'll keep going here. This year we mapped over 28,000 hectares in the west, and I believe the next picture is closer. Excuse me. Again, this is severe or moderate to severe damage. So there's a lot more areas that are impacted by HWA that are in light or low infestation rates that would not be detected from the air. Now this year, excuse me, there have been some developments in our fight against emerald ash borer. Prior to this year, we only had one toolbox for fighting against emerald ash borer, and that was an injectable pesticide called triazine. Excuse me. This year, we've had emergency registration applications for 2 more species, 2 more chemicals, and a label expansion for another one. Thankfully, all those have been successful. So now we have 4 pesticides that we can actually use for the emerald ash borer. 2 of them are injectables, where they go directly into the tree. This bottom picture here, either in canisters, or you drill a hole in the tree and put the product directly in with a applicator, or basal bark spray, and you keep the wand very close to the tree. Conditions have to be right, no rain, no wind, and you apply the pesticide to the base of the tree. We also had applied, it's not myself, Department of Environment of Nova Scotia and Department of Natural Resources and Renewable applied for some funding through the ECCC. Forgive me, I forget that one. For funding, we were awarded a large amount of money for not only pesticide treatments, but for also land acquisition to protect land from being cut and to work on some biocontrol. Biocontrol is being looked at by Canadian Forestry Service as well. They're looking at introduction of beetles and some flies that are very specific to hemlock woolly adelgid or other woolly adelgid species like balsam woolly adelgid, which is also an introduced species, or pine woolly adelgid. That's the only thing they feed on. But that will be coming in the next coming years. This year, we finally got to treat some areas, and the picture on the right here is I wanted to brag about one of my coworkers. She developed an app for tracking where we've done the work, and this is just one of the sites, and it just shows this is a hectare. Within that hectare, there were 24 trees counted and sprayed for one product, and then 65 trees that were counted and then treated with another product, injected. We can only spray within outside of 7 meters from a water source, so we have to inject anything within that 7-meter buffer. And the last thing I'm going to speak of is Fiona. I don't have a lot of details about our hurricane this year, other than it was very expensive. I lost part of my roof. The damage has yet to be assessed forest-wise. There's been over, can't see my notes, estimated $385 million in insurance claims because of that. This poor soul here. My small roof damage is minor compared to that. But they're currently looking at satellite imagery for determining what damage has been done to our forest from Hurricane Fiona. It had they say the size of Dorian and the strength of Hurricane Juan, and Hurricane Juan took out a 60-kilometer swath up the center of the province. Anyway, I better stop rambling. Told you I ramble. I believe I'm done. So Doug, now you have to take over.
So thank you, Jeff. We appreciate your insights on forest pests. Great information to have, even though it's a little depressing. but thank you for letting us know what's happening in that area. Our next speaker today is Doug Van Hemsen. Doug is the Nova Scotia Stewardship Coordinator for the Nature Conservancy of Canada. He was an art school graduate before studying geography at Trent University. Since then, he has spent more than 20 years working with conservation groups in Southern Ontario and now in Atlantic Canada. Whenever you're ready, Doug.
Okay, thanks. So I will share and all right, how's that looking?
It looks good. Just need to hit start show, I think.
Yeah, and where is that? Whoops.
Right along the top is one.
Which I can't see now because can I
try
do
the bottom? The bottom by the, there you go. You almost had it.
Right here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. And here we go. So I'm going to tell you about Hemlock woolly adelgid and what NCC is experiencing so far and how we're trying to manage it. As Jeff alluded, it's expanding rapidly, and it's a very difficult thing to do any control with, primarily because it's pretty labor intensive and it's expensive. You can't do aerial spraying or something like that. You have to do the stem injection or the basal bark spray, and so it's very difficult to control. You can see the photo on the right there of what a hemlock looks like after a few years of the insect. Wanted to let people know about the Nova Scotia Hemlock Initiative. It's there's the website address for you, and that is a partnership of all the groups in Nova Scotia working on the HWA, and it's a really great source of information. It's designed for the layperson, but it's got all kinds of links and information with a lot of detail about the insect and what's being done and what you can do and what the future may hold. So I highly recommend you check that out if you're looking for a lot more detail than we're going to be able to give you today. So Jeff mentioned a little bit of this about management, chemical, which is what's been done and being done, really the primary method. There's also silvicultural management, which is not really an effective means of control, but is a way to try and manage some of the impacts through stand thinning and keeping good trees. But it's alone, it's not nearly anything that's going to stop the insect. And then the biocontrol, which again, Jeff alluded to, and there may be hope for that in the not too distant future of actually releasing some predators, and we'll see, if that can get ahead of the wave of the Adelgid in Nova Scotia. So I'm going to give you a description of one of our properties, one of our newer properties in southwest Nova Scotia. Really, you can see in the corner map there, in the ground zero of the HWA infestation. Property we acquired just a couple of years ago, a very large property, 950 hectares and 25 kilometers of shoreline and wetlands. It's a very big property, some very beautiful forest in there, some old forest, and a lot of hemlock stands as well. When we did our field work there in 2021, all of the hemlock stands that we observed, we could see the HWA was present. That was no surprise. We didn't really find any, except you find the occasional scattered small stand where there may be less of it, but primarily across the whole site. Just to give you an idea there, you can see the crown thinning in that left-hand photo, and in the upper right, the foliage kind of, it's usually like a nice deep green. It's kind of turns grayish and looks sickly. And then the lower right there, you can see the little white sacs that indicate the presence of the Adelgid. So in 2022, with the help of some of our friends from the Kitchim-Kujik National Park, who have a very active program for HWA, they took a look at a couple of the stands on our property. We don't have enough expertise in-house. We haven't dealt with it for very long, and they offered to help us because they've got the eyes and they've done some work. So they were better assessors of what's going on and whether there might be hope for some of the stands that are in that location. And we did locate one that seemed to have enough crown foliage, and it's an old stand. I would call it old growth, a lot of big trees. And we assessed 123 of those. We measured the diameters just to get an idea of, if we wanted to treat that, what are we looking at in terms of what amount of time we need and what amount of product we need to actually get this done. And we're hopeful for some potential treatment this fall. But as the summer wore on, some of the technicians with Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change also investigated the stands, and there started to be some differences of opinion about whether it was really a stand worth treating. It was, it's really right on the edge in terms of whether it's worth it or not. And you don't really know until, the following year. This year when we saw it, it looked like maybe there was hope. There wasn't a lot of new growth on the end of the branches, so like fresh needles, which is an indicator that things are maybe beyond repair. But it went back and forth, and depending who looked at it said, well, maybe you can do it, maybe it's worth a shot, and others said, well, maybe not worthwhile. And ultimately, it's not going to happen. Between that assessment, that it's very marginal, and also just the capacity to actually do it. Jeff mentioned the program that the province has just got funded with through Environment Canada, and they're out there now as we speak, and they're trying to get rapidly to sites that were a little more hopeful than this one. And ultimately we decided, okay, we'll see what this looks like next year. If there's new growth on those branches, maybe it's worth doing. If there's not, then we know the decision not to treat it was probably the right one. So what are we going to do from here? We are going to be a little more proactive in terms of watching out for the advancing front. So this slide shows the regulated counties in Southwest Nova Scotia. So that's what the CFIA has regulated in terms of hemlock wood transport and management. And so that is all the way east to Lunenburg and Kings now. And it is absolutely no doubt that front will keep advancing to the east. And what are we going to do about that? Well, another thing that is going on is looking at hemlock stands, that the province is doing this through their forest inventory, which is and satellite analysis, looking at where the hemlocks are and where the density of hemlocks are. And that way we can maybe determine where the highest priority stands are. So this is just a quick snapshot of the all of the forest, all of the hemlock in the forest inventory, and there's a lot, as you can see. The little red bits you see are NCC properties, and that's what it looks like. And I'm not expecting you to interpret, where your house is and trying to figure that out. That's not what this is intended. It's just to give you an illustration. So the greener the location, the higher priority the stand is. And that was looking at a number of values, not just the presence of hemlock, but the density of hemlock and MICMA values, accessibility to roads, which is a factor if you're going to do any treatment. So not just the hemlock itself, but other values as well. And so this is what it starts to look like, and chunk by chunk, looking at the province. In the southwest, where we know there's a high density of hemlock, and also where we know the insect is well established and doing a lot of damage. Any of the stands that we've seen on our properties in Southwest Nova Scotia that are hemlock are impacted, either already way gone or well on the way. And in central Nova Scotia, where the insect is yet to come along, hemlock tends to thin out in the eastern shore area. And just by virtue of the location of our properties between the southwest area and going farther east, we don't have a lot of property holdings in the central area. And so we're not looking at any of those because we don't have properties that we're looking at. When we get into the Musquodoboit Harbor area, then we're seeing more of the hemlock again. And then in the North Shore area, where we've got some very large holdings in the Pugwash area, in Chignecto, where there's not a lot of hemlock, and in the Cobequid Hills, south of Tatamagouche, the Cook property, a large property, and in Cape Breton, where there is a good densities of hemlock. And again, the little blue areas are where our properties are located. So the thing about the aerial interpretation, so where those hemlocks are, is that it is, as I said, done by satellite, and they're pretty good actually. They're not bad, but you have to ground truth things. And so if we compare, looking at the mapping, just the location of hemlock, this is what it shows us, and then this is where the priority hemlock comes into play. So this is just hemlock presence. This is the density of the stand. What we need to do is we will go to these locations, and for this little peninsula here, for example, which is indicated as a high priority hemlock area, we will go and ground truth that. So we'll go out there, get boots on the ground, and see what's going on, and see what the hemlock there is looking like, and then we'll monitor that into the future. Another one close to Pugwash, the Doherty's Brook site. Again, we'll be looking at these areas in green because that's the stand priority, the higher scores. Just because it shows hemlock doesn't necessarily mean there is a high density of hemlock there. It's all got to be ground truth. So again, we'll be going in and checking on the areas where it indicates a high priority, and collecting data to see what's going on and whether it's a site that we want to monitor and potentially treat should the insect come that way. And with the Dr. George Cook property, this is the one south of Tatamagouche, same thing, some high priority stands indicated here. We'll go out there next summer and we'll check on those and see what's going on. So there's a quick tour of the province and NCC locations and what we plan to do. I would like to thank the CBC and Moonshine Cast. Maybe some of you may be familiar with that program on CBC. They have actually contributed some funding towards future treatment of hemlock should we need it, and that's very helpful. It's expensive to do, and so it's a big help to us, and something that would be a challenge to do without that help. So I will stop the share, and I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I think that leaves us time for questions, and I'll let you pick up the hosting duties again, Jennifer.
Thank you, Doug. We're grateful to you for your time today and for sharing that NCC expertise. It's always great to have those examples to draw on for the crowd. Okay, so I am just going to share my screen again here, and there we go. Okay, so we do have well, now my chat box has disappeared, so let me just make sure. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we have several questions for the speakers that have been submitted by the audience. As a reminder, if you have a question that you have not submitted, please enter it using the Q&A chat box feature. Let us know who the question's for, and we will get through as many as we can with the time that we have. So, all right, let's get to our first question here. So our first question, and this is either, this may be for Jeff. Can you start by letting us know what the main pest is in PEI, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland?
Newfoundland and New Brunswick would be spruce budworm at this time. Newfoundland has a major outbreak on the western coast. New Brunswick has an outbreak in the northern part of the province. PEI, maybe beach-life binding weevil. They don't have a lot of problems, and I haven't heard about any. Again, where I'm having a meeting next week with provincial counterparts, and I'll be hearing all those details at that point. But nothing has come across the wires of anything major in PEI. But Newfoundland and New Brunswick, it's all about spruce budworm.
That's great, thank you. So our next question here, while HWA is specific to hemlock, have there ever been reports of it being seen on other conifers? I have seen some fluffy white pests on tips of white spruce with die-off of partial branches that seem to recover the next year. What nasty critter might I be seeing? And this is from David Swallows.
If it's a fluffy bug, it's likely a woolly adelgid, but it's not an HWA. Hemlock woolly adelgid only attacks hemlock. We have a number of other woolly adelgids in Nova Scotia. There's actually the most common one is alder woolly adelgid, which gets, or alder woolly aphid, sorry, which gets in the air, and I've seen it look like snow at times, falling from the sky, and it can land on a branch and may look like it caused the damage, but not necessarily been the agent that caused that. There are adelgid. Now, adelgids only feed on conifer trees. They're very similar to aphids, but adelgids only feed on conifer trees. There are winged adelgids that feed on spruce if you ever see those, the tips of spruce, whether it's white or red, sometimes Norway, we'll get these little, they look like pine cones. They're hard as rock. That is a gall caused by an Adelgid. And inside of that gall are these Adelgid. And certain times of the year, they leave, their winged form will leave. So you may be seeing those as well.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Robert Kamosi. Why does Nova Scotia still permit extensive logging in the spring during songbird migration? By delaying to fall, winter would not assist in controlling pests and overall forest health. My question is a follow-up to Bob Bancroft article published last year. Thank you for a great presentation.
I can't really address that at all. That's not something I deal with, is the cutting part. That's other parts of the province, the DNR are. Sorry.
Sure, that's fair.
Bugs are hard enough.
Absolutely. Next question comes from Kara Kirkpatrick. What is the Adelgid's native range? Have biocontrol agents been used elsewhere?
It's an Asian species, believed to come over in 1951 to around 1950s to the southeastern part of the United States. And biocontrol has been used in the northeastern part of the states for the last 20 years with varied success. It depends on when you start releasing these biocontrols. It can take up to a decade before you start seeing any results from the initial release of these biocontrols. Our counterparts in New Brunswick, in the US are quite envious of us because we're starting a much earlier than any of they have down places like New York State. So they're hopeful for us, but there is no guarantees. There's no guarantees with the treatments that we're using with the pesticide treatments. We're going with what other people have told us. Doug was talking about trees. Well, maybe this tree will survive or benefit from a pesticide treatment. We really don't know. I've looked at, we're doing treatments down in the West last week or 2 weeks ago. And it's like, oh, I think this tree will survive. It looks healthy enough. I often wonder if the sentence starts with, maybe it will, we may want to move on, because there's so many other stands, as Doug mentioned, east of where the main infestation area is, that will be receptive to the treatments, the chemical treatments, and almost guarantee those should be surviving. Anyway, that's a soapbox of mine. I'll step off it.
Okay, so we have time for one more question here. I know there are many other questions in the chat, and what we will do is send the questions to Doug and Jeff directly, and they can follow up with you at a later time to be able to answer, if that's okay. So the last question that we have is for Doug. Will NCC do any HWA treatments in NCC's Southwest Nova Scotia properties? If so, where, and how will NCC determine what will be treated?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thanks, John, for that question. I see your name in the chat there. It depends. I know that's not much of an answer. We will look at, we're going to be using the stand prioritization mapping to look at where we still overlap with that in our properties in the Southwest. And we will focus on looking at those. And now that, we have better eyes for it, or I do at least, if it seems like there might be hope, then we may very well treat. But we don't know yet what's going on in all of those high priority stands. We have to see what's on the ground. And, not to be pessimistic, but again, from the stands we have seen, or that others have reported on for us, it's not looking good. But you never know. There may be stands here and there that have managed to evade the insect. And if we find anything like that on any of our properties, then we would definitely consider treating those.
Can I add a little something there? We also have different tools now. Initially, we only had a product that once it was put into the tree, it would take 6 to 8 months to get up into the tree before it would do anything. Now we have a product at hand that we can treat the tree with. It's into the tree within weeks, and it's starting to kill the tree. It's starting to kill the tree. Sorry, starting to kill the Adelgid. So for some of these trees that are in decline, we do have that tool now in the toolbox that can help some of these trees that maybe may not have come around fast enough or lasted long enough for those other products to work. So there is hope for some of those maybes. I'm still leaning towards not so much the maybes, but some of those maybes need to be treated.
I'll take your optimism, Jeff. That's good to hear.
It's so much different. When I first started seeing this, well, actually before it ended up in the province, of all the invasive species that could have got here, that was the one I didn't want to see. Emerald ash borer, yeah, it's going to kill. Every place else it kills 95% of their ash trees. Our ash component is not nearly as big as the hemlock component. HWA is a ecological changer. You know, there's areas down there that, whether it's riparian or middle of nowhere or what have you, those are changed forever once those trees are gone. It's sad. Anyway.
Well, that's all the time that we have for questions today. If you didn't get to your question or have something else that you would like to ask any of the panelists, please reach out to us at events@natureconservancy.ca. As we close, I would like to turn things over to the Honorable Diane Griffin, the volunteer vice chair of NCC's Atlantic Regional Board of Directors, to recognize the many people who made this evening possible.
Thank you. Well, that was a very informative session. I'd like to thank everybody that is on the call who volunteers with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. I volunteer with the NCC on the board of directors because I believe really strongly in land conservation. After all, it's results that we can walk on. It's fantastic. So I know everyone here would also have a similar story. So I'd like to thank our presenters today, Jeff Ogden, a Nova Scotia Provincial Forest Entomologist from the Government of Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. Thank you very much. And our own Doug Van Hemmensen, Nova Scotia Stewardship Manager with NCC. Thanks, Doug. It's great to see you again. And our MC, Jennifer White. She's the NCC's Atlantic Community Engagement Coordinator. So there's a lot of work that NCC has done in the region. I'm really proud of some of the work they've done here in Prince Edward Island also. I would have to comment on the Conway Sandhills. That's going to be part of a new national park that NCC and the federal government through Parks Canada and the Mi'kmaq Confederacy are going to co-manage. It's a fantastic project. Oltons Island will also be added to that project. So it's a really exciting thing for us here. It's a big project for Prince Edward Island. And I'd like to thank the thousands of donors who support our volunteer program and events. In particular, the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund and the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund have been great. And I know Doug has already thanked them, but I would like to add my thanks to the CBC and E1's Moonshine Cast and crew, who they are generously funding the necessary treatments for hemlock, woolly, Adelgid in Nova Scotia, and has already commented it's an expensive business. Doug made that very clear, but thanks for that support. Also, thanks to all of you for joining us on Giving Tuesday. If you were in a place to give to support the amazing work of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, we'd like to hear from you. And today, you can double your impact for nature. Any donation today to NCC will be matched by Maple Cross Fund up to $150,000, that is. You can accelerate the pace of conservation and find solutions to the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change by giving today. Please use the link in the chat, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane, for those closing remarks. For updates on future webinars and events in your area, check out our events page at natureconservancy.ca. And please stay tuned for the link to today's recording, webinar recording. Once again, thank you to Jeff and Doug for sharing your knowledge, insights, and expertise. Thank you to Diane for your lovely closing remarks. And thanks to all of you for joining us for today's webinar. Just a reminder to all the NCC volunteers on the webinar that we'll be setting up a breakout room shortly. Please remain in the meeting. On behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day. We hope to see you next time.